What if I told you that one of the most controversial elections in American history didn't happen in the year 2000 with George Bush and Al Gore, but way back in 1876? And what if the man who came out on top by just one single electoral vote ended Reconstruction, changed the course of civil rights, and yet is almost forgotten today? That man was Rutherford Burchard Hayes, the 19th President of the United States. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hayes? Isn't he one of those presidents lost between the Civil War and Theodore Roosevelt? Well, yes, but his story is far from boring. Hayes's presidency might not make the headlines today, but his decisions influenced how America rebuilt itself after the Civil War, and his contested election in 1876 remains one of the most controversial in U.S. history. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into the life of Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes was born on October 4th, 1822, in Delaware, Ohio. Here's something remarkable. His father died before he was even born. That meant he was raised mostly by his mother, Sophia, who became a guiding figure in his life. Young Rutherford grew up in modest circumstances, but education was always a priority. He attended Kenyon College, where he graduated as a valedictorian and later studied law school at Harvard Law School. Yes, that's right, Hayes was one of the few presidents of the 19th century with a Harvard background. By the 1850s, he established a successful law practice in Cincinnati, Ohio. There, he became known not just as a lawyer, but also as a defender of runaway slaves. This tells us something important about Hayes. Long before the Civil War, he had already aligned himself with the anti-slavery cause. When the war broke out in 1861, Hayes didn't hesitate. Even though he could have stayed safe in his legal practice, he volunteered for the Union Army. And here's where his life takes a heroic turn. Hayes fought bravely in some of the bloodiest battles of the war, including South Mountain, Antietam, and Cedar Creek. He was wounded multiple times, once shot through the arm, another time hit in the head, but each time he returned to the front lines. General Ulysses S. Grant praised him as one of the bravest men in the Union Army. By the end of the war, Hayes had risen to the rank of Major General. His military service gave him both national recognition and a deep sense of loyalty from veterans, something that later fueled his political career. After the war, Hayes transitioned into politics. He served as a Republican congressman from Ohio and later as the governor of Ohio for 3 terms. As governor, he pushed for prison reform, better schools, and civil service improvements. But here's the twist. He wasn't exactly a flashy politician. Hayes wasn't a firebrand speaker or a man of charisma. Instead, he was steady, honest, and principled, qualities that eventually earned him the Republican nomination for president in 1876. Now we arrive at one of the most dramatic moments in American political history: the presidential election of 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes and Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. This election was so chaotic and controversial that many historians call it the most disputed in U.S. history, even more so than Bush v. Gore in 2000. Here's what happened. Tilden won the popular vote and appeared to have more electoral votes as well, but 20 electoral votes from several southern states were in dispute due to accusations of fraud, intimidation, and ballot tampering. For months, the country didn't know who the next president would be. Some even feared a return to civil war. Finally, a special electoral commission made up of congressmen, senators, and Supreme Court justices awarded all 20 contested votes to Hayes. That gave him exactly 185 electoral votes, just one more than Tilden's 184. The result? Hayes became known as Rutherfraud, or his fraudulency, by his critics. But behind the scenes, there was a bigger deal at play: the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for Hayes's presidency, Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. This decision had massive consequences, paving the way for the rise of segregation and Jim Crow laws in the South. So what kind of president was Hayes? First, he was committed to reform. He wanted to clean up government corruption, especially in the civil service. At the time, government jobs were often handed out as political rewards, the infamous spoils system. Hayes believed in merit, not political connections. He also took a stand against using federal troops to intervene in labor strikes, most famously during the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. While his decision to send troops angered many workers, Hayes saw it as necessary to restore order. On race, Hayes had a complicated record. He supported African American rights in theory, but his withdrawal of troops from the South left millions of freedmen vulnerable to discrimination and violence. Historians still debate whether he had much choice, given the political realities of the time. Unlike many politicians, Hayes kept his word. He served just one term and stepped down in 1881. After leaving Washington, Hayes returned to Ohio, where he focused on causes close to his heart. He advocated for education, especially for African Americans, and supported prison reform. Hayes believed education was the key to opportunity, famously saying, "The progress of society depends on the education of the people." He also became an early supporter of women's education, working to expand opportunities for women at a time when it was still controversial. So how should we remember Rutherford B. Hayes? On the one hand, his presidency is often remembered for the contested election of 1876 and the Compromise of 1877 that ended Reconstruction. That deal left a dark legacy for African Americans in the South, who faced nearly a century of segregation and disenfranchisement. On the other hand, Hayes was a man of integrity, a war hero, and a reformer who fought against corruption in government. He may not rank among the greatest presidents, but his life reflects the struggles and contradictions of America in the post-Civil War era. Rutherford B. Hayes, the forgotten president who helped end Reconstruction, fought for civil service reform, and lived by a code of honor. His presidency might not make the top 10 lists, but his story reminds us that history is shaped not only by towering figures like Lincoln and Roosevelt, but also by quiet leaders who navigated times of crisis. If you enjoyed today's deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your fellow history buffs. And let me know in the comments, do you think Hayes was right to accept the Compromise of 1877, or did it betray the cause of Reconstruction? Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep history alive.